One of Minister Hellyer's colleagues who helps arrange his meetings, Christopher Rousset, a lifelong advocate of truth and knowledge, an avid amateur astronomer and cosmologist, Christopher puts his passion into action by organizing groups in the fields of esoteric information and ufology, such as being a co-host of the Modern Knowledge Tour and helping to arrange Minister Hellyer's speaking events. Currently, Christopher develops video productions for independent researchers and creates a social media presence for them on the internet. So Christopher will be speaking a little bit more because he knows Minister Hellyer a lot better than I do. And I think it's pretty neat that this is just 10 years since he spoke out about UFOs and is the highest ranking politician on the planet who's brave and intelligent enough to speak about something that we all need to hear about. So, Christopher?
Thank you, Marilyn. Well, thank you very much, Marilyn, for the wonderful introduction, and thank you all for attending tonight's event. It's an honor and a privilege for me to be in your space here tonight, and thank you so much for welcoming us here. She pretty well nailed it on the head there. I run Modern Knowledge Tour. The whole essence of modern knowledge, you can find it online at modernknowledge.ca, is to bring people out into forums like this, but to do so across Canada. So every year we head from coast to coast and we arrange speakers from all around the world that have important information to share, and we want to share that information with Canadians. And it's one thing to see things online, read them online, watch videos online, interact online, but it's also another thing, and the Toronto Dowsers do that so wonderfully. You can feel the energy in the room, and that's the essence of the Modern Knowledge Tour, is to bring that energy back to life again. If you want to come talk to me a little bit later, we have 2 events coming up in the next 2 Saturdays in a row. One of them actually features Mr. Hellyer next weekend at the University of Toronto. A friend of mine, Dr. Lana Marconi, is releasing her documentary film called The Resonance, and it's about ET contact. So Paul will be there along with a lot of the other guests that are featured in her documentary film. And then the weekend after that, at the J. Millay Theatre, right next to the St. Lawrence Market, we're hosting Earth Rhythms. And it's kind of along the lines the same way the Dowsers think. My first public speaking appearance actually was at a Canadian Dowsers function in Hamilton a few years back. So Earth Rhythm is designed to get people back grounded to the earth, to get out of that cyberspace, to come back and just to have a day of just total organic, not just the food, not just the water, but to get into that organic headspace and to reconnect with the earth. And we got some pretty cool speakers in attendance that day. So without further ado, I first met Paul about 3 years ago. I was nervously sent him an email and invited him out. I wanted to do a disclosure event. And I thought it was the coolest thing when he didn't respond to my email. Just all of a sudden on my cell phone it says Paul Hellyer. That called me. And we chatted and we've been friends ever since. I've been across Canada with Paul. I've been to New York City with Paul. We've had some pretty amazing experiences together. And I truly must say, I've met a lot of people. Paul is one of those people that have a very special place in my heart. He is a true warrior of truth. He is a man that is unwavering in his dedication to help humanity free itself from any of the vices that were erroneously put upon us as a civilization, as a spiritual being. Paul is a very spiritual man. He's a very factual man too. And that combination really struck a chord with me. And it's just been an honor and a privilege for me to be a colleague and a friend of his over the last few years working together. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada and the former Minister of Defense of Canada, the Honourable Paul T. Hellyer.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that much too generous introduction. And especially thank you for only saying the nice things that you know about me. It's always good to have a friend like that. And thank you, Marilyn, for insisting. Marilyn tracked me down like a, well, I don't want to use a metaphor that wouldn't be appropriate, but she really insisted and kept at it until finally she wore down my resistance, and I'm here tonight. Of course, it's a special pleasure for two other reasons. One, my only visit to Estonia many, many years ago, which I remember with such fond thoughts and vibes from way back, and the special connection with that part of the world at a time when it was suppressed by an outside force. And of course, I was raised on a farm, so my connection with the Dowsers, my father never did anything without having a Dowser around. So when we dug a well, he found out with a little help from a Dowser where to go, and sure enough, there was water. So it's a special privilege to be here tonight. My presentation is a little bit like a State of the Union address in the US, stripped of all the lies and exaggerations one hears in one of those. I'm sure the misrepresentations are not intentional. I don't think a politician would ever tell a lie intentionally, would they? I don't know. But sometimes the absence of truth is very obvious. And that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight. I plan to talk about 3 or 4 of the most important topics facing the world today. The first, of course, is global warming. Top of the list as far as I'm concerned. And is getting a little attention, but not nearly enough. The second is the international banking and financial cartel. And it's the most urgent because there are 200 million unemployed people in the world today. And according to a report that was presented at the Davis conclave earlier this year, there will be, or could be, 250 million unemployed in 2016. Well, to say this is a tragedy is just a gross understatement. All those people without the opportunity to use their talents and their education and their drive and their desire to help create a better world, out of the loop because of the way the system is working. And also, if we don't solve the financial situation, very, very soon, kiss the world goodbye, because there won't be enough money. Nation states won't have enough money to finance and to subsidize a fast transition from an oil economy to a zero-point energy economy, because we're talking about trillions of dollars. We can do it, we'll talk about it later. And the third is the extraterrestrial presence and relationship with the US, its armed forces, all set in the wider context of what is going on in the United States and in the world. As early as October 1940, the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington, D.C. decided that Hitler was going to lose the war and that they should sponsor another empire centered with the United States, in the United States, to replace the empire that Hitler wanted to build, but it would be bigger, it would include all of the lands that he was interested in, plus all of North America, plus a number of countries in Southeast Asia. In other words, it was going to be the biggest empire of all time, and certainly since the Roman Empire millennia ago. But when the war ended, it was a relevant happening, and that was Operation Paperclip. I'm sure most of you know about it, but the United States Armed Forces were interested in the technology that the Germans had, which in some areas was superior to their own, especially in rocketry at that time. So they wanted to get their hands on some of the German generals, scientists of various kinds, and they asked President Truman if that would be okay, and he said yes, as long as they didn't have any close connections to the Nazi Party. Well, having been Minister of Defense, I can attest that sometimes the forces pay attention to you when you speak, and sometimes they don't. And that was a case where they paid no attention to the president whatsoever. They just went ahead and brought in anybody that they wanted. And some of them had very close connections to the Nazi Party. When they were brought in, they were given new identities so that they would be invisible to the public, and new jobs, some of them very senior jobs in the military as well as in other areas of American life. And it was quite an anomaly that happened. The CIA was involved in bringing them in and doing their new dossiers and giving them their new identities, at the same time that another branch of the CIA was out looking for Nazis who had managed to get in illegally so that they could deport them. The CIA has been like that ever since. They have several hands. Not one of them knows what the others are doing, I sometimes believe. The rationale, of course, was to fight communists. It was inevitable, I think, that some of those Germans were familiar with at least one of the species of extraterrestrials. It was probably the Greys, who had been working in Germany before and during World War II. In the US, there was little interest in the ETs until the two crashes near Roswell, New Mexico. Is anybody strong enough to take this off for me? I guess I could do it if I wanted to interrupt for about 5 minutes. And thank you. The causes of those crashes created some controversy. It was said that it was due to lightning strikes. And another reason, I think, finally wound up to be the accepted one, and that was that the United States government had just installed some new very high-powered radars, which affected their electromagnetic control systems, and that this was what brought them down. There had been, of course, crashes before that. One in 1945, also in New Mexico, which was brought to public attention about just a few years ago by a friend and mentor of mine, Paul Hellyer. And I had the pleasure of talking to one of the young chaps who had been at the scene and who had witnessed the whole thing, including the survivors of that crash. And allegedly there was one that the United States Navy had fished out of the South Pacific. I think there were others, but those two just happened to know about. But it was the ones at Roswell that really got people's attention and sort of was the beginning of the interest in the whole subject. And I know when I was just starting out on this journey, the last 10 years, people would say, oh, Roswell, you know. And as if it had some magic about it. I guess maybe in a sense it did. On Tuesday, July the 8th, 1947, Mountain Time, Roswell Army Airfield Commander Colonel William Blanchard announced that they had retrieved a flying disc. Put out a press release, and this was carried in the local papers, headlines in the local papers. Later that same day, around 4:30 Central Standard Time, Brigadier General Roger Ramey, commander of the 8th Air Force and Blanchard's supervising officer, put out an alternative story. He said, no, it wasn't a disc that they had found. It was a Rawin target, that's R-A-W-I-N, target device, suspended by a neoprene rubber balloon. Well, that was a lie. Just a blatant, outright lie. And that's the one that incidentally was carried by the Eastern Press, New York Times, and the Washington Post, and so on. Not only was it a lie, it was the cornerstone lie, which is still United States official policy 68 years later. Because when it comes to this subject, they're very, very selective when they confirm anything related to it. Although the United States government feigned disinterest, according to an early Canadian enthusiast, Wilbur Smith, who worked in the Department of Transport, which some years later I became minister of, he wrote a top secret memorandum on November 21st, 1950, addressed to his superior officer, which said really 4 things to start off. 1, UFOs are real. They may be, or some people say they are. It just said, this man was a scientist who had gained scientific information from his colleagues in Washington. UFOs are real. Secondly, that the matter was the most highly classified in the United States, higher than the H-bomb. Well, if any of you know how high the H-bomb was classified, just go a little higher, and you've got the ET file. So it was right at the top of the list. The matter was considered of tremendous significance by the people of the United States. And fourthly, that a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush were trying to learn how the craft worked. Well, the matter must have been taken very seriously because President Harry Truman established a small group of 12 people to manage the ET file. They subsequently became known as MJ-12, the Magic 12. And they were given tremendous power to determine the course of action. You can understand the concern at the time. If you put yourself in the place of the officers and officials of the day, they had just helped win. I say helped. I know 2 or 3 American friends who think they won the war on their own. But actually they played a very important part in winning the war, and especially in the latter years. And they had top dog status. They had great technology. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, some visitors from elsewhere arrive with technology that is light years ahead of ours. And that would be very disconcerting. So I can understand their concern. And they were working on this back engineering, as we call it. And they moved the operation out to Nevada and later in Arizona. And according to Dr. Michael Salas, who was a well-known ufologist and professor, President Eisenhower gave Nelson Rockefeller the job of how best to control the back engineering. It was a strange mix where I don't think they've sorted it out yet, maybe totally, of government and industry working all in the same group. But it was good for deniability because they were able to put a lot of information in the hands of private industry so that if somebody wanted to get information from the Air Force, they could say, well, we don't have it. We've looked in our files, we don't have it. Technically, probably true. If they told the whole truth, and there's a big difference between part of the truth and the whole truth, they would have said, well, if you go across the street to such and such an industry, why, you'll find it in their files. But of course, that was the purpose of mixing things up, as Rockefeller had suggested. Strange mixture of deniability. Well, President Eisenhower wanted to know what was going on out there in Nevada, and he was told that he didn't need to know. And, you know, if I had been the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe at the end of the war and then President of the United States, and some of my subordinates said, you don't need to know, sir, I don't think I would have been very happy. Well, he wasn't very happy. And finally, he threatened to send the First Army from Colorado if they didn't let him send some people out there to see what was going on. And they gave in, and he was able to send 3 of his buddies out there, and they just found what you might expect, and they visited, I guess, Area 51 and S4, and they learned what you would expect was that they were back engineering the vehicle that they had brought back from Roswell. Well, no president since then has been cleared to know the total nature and extent of the special operations, otherwise known as black operations, otherwise known as black ops, which is what we call them when we're talking about them. This is despite, interestingly enough, every president but one being a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, which was becoming a part of a much larger and more powerful group that I and others call the Cabal. It joined forces with a newer, more secretive group, the Bilderbergers. It was post-war. It started out with some noble aspirations, preventing another European war and so on. But then it began to take on an entirely different and more sinister outlook on things, because everything was secret, and they managed to get some of the most powerful press in the world on their side. You had to take an oath when you were invited there not to say anything about what had happened. And then the third one of these groups was the Trilateral Commission. Zbigniew Brzezinski, when Japan was coming up a little bit and getting more powerful, said to Mr. Rockefeller, I think we should do something to bring the East in. And the two of them went to the Bilderberger meeting, and it was this idea was received with approval. And so David Rockefeller went back and established the Trilateral Commission. And it is the most transparent of the three. They actually publish some of their things. In my book, The guess in both last of my latest books, I call them the Three Sisters. And many of the elite group that we talk about in general terms are members of all three. And that would include David Rockefeller. The three elite groups are part of what is now called the Cabal. And it includes the banking and financial system, the banking cartel. And that is at the apex. They print the money, so they have most of the power, and that's the top of the pyramid. In addition, it comprises the oil cartel. And then the CEOs of the huge transnational corporations. And then the intelligence agencies, mostly but not exclusively US, CIA, the FBI, the NSA, our brother is watching us, and I guess MI6 is involved a little bit, the British MI6 and the Israeli Mossad. And then finally, a huge slice of the US military. And they are what I call the Cabal. They have taken over the governance of the United States. They call the shots in the USA and beyond. The president isn't running the United States, and Congress is not running the United States. To a very, very large extent, the Cabal is. It is sometimes referred to as the shadow government, or the alternative government. And its power is almost beyond words. When senior White House correspondent Sarah McClendon asked President Bill Clinton why he didn't make more of the information about the ET file public, he said, and I quote, "Sarah, there is a government within the government, and I don't control it." Imagine the President of the United States, the most powerful country in the world, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the United States, the man with his finger on the atomic button, and he doesn't know what his subordinates are doing because they've got the gall to tell him that he doesn't need to know. Well, the Cabal controls the international monetary system. It is the apex, as I have said, of the Cabal. And that's the reason I've called my latest book, The Money Mafia. Because it is a group which has been robbing ordinary folks for centuries. The Money Mafia has a monopoly on the creation of money. The banks don't own the patents. We own the patent in our country, but we don't use it. We don't use that power. It's available to us. The banks are just licensees. We give them a license, and then we have to go and say, would you please lend us some money which we'll have to pay back capital and interest. I made a speech to Toronto Mensa last Saturday where I went in through the whole system of how it works and how it came to be so powerful. Not doing that tonight. But they are actually allowed to lend the same money to 20 different people or organizations or governments and collect the interest from each one of them at the same time. Now, wouldn't you like to be able to do that? You'd get rich quick, but you'd also go to jail because you didn't have a bank charter. So in effect, they are able to buy up the assets of the world for 5 cents on the dollar. And they're becoming, and have become, immensely rich. Trillionaires, some of them. More money than you can count if you live to be very old. And in the meantime, as I said, there's not enough to put people to work and to save the planet. Because it's all in the hands of a very few people. 80 families last year owned half of the wealth of the world. 80 families. You could put them all in one street in Toronto. And they own half of the whole world. Last year was 86 or 88. But that's the trend. It's getting smaller all the time because this concentration, including globalization and the way the system is working, is just getting the money flowing right up to the top, as it has been for a long while, but more so. And the way it's going, there's no hope. Because it's a dead end. 2 minutes. You take, if you have to borrow all the money that comes into circulation, and it's the gasoline that drives the economic engine, so you have to do that. You can only get money by borrowing. Then, though, you have to pay it back with interest. And the money that you borrow isn't real money, it's just credit. So there's only 5 cents in the dollar of what I call blood, sweat, and tears money that somebody has actually worked for. But when they make the credit of $100, you have to pay the $100 back in blood, sweat, and tears money, you know, of whatever you're doing, working in a hospital or teaching or building roads or tearing up roads, whatever. And with interest. So that's the reason we're in the hole we're in. There is no hope of the kind of robust growth that we had in this country when I was young, unless we go back to the kind of system we had then, when the money creation function was shared between the Government of Canada and the private banks. And we had that from 1939 to 1974, when Governor Bowie unilaterally changed the system, started going along with the Bank for International Settlements, which is the sort of the clearinghouse for the monetary mafia, and made us borrow in the market when we ran deficits, the big recessions of 81, 82, and 1991. And do you know how much that's cost us? Any guesses? How much?
It was like this until 1994 or 74, now it's like that. It just went straight.
Yeah, it did straight up. We have paid $1 trillion, 100 billion, or $1.1 trillion in interest from 1974-75 until 2010-11. None of which was necessary. Just let your mind run for a minute or two with what we could do fixing up potholes and building. We could even tear down the Gardner and make it two levels or something so you could move in Toronto if we had that kind of money. Well, we did have, but we had to pay it in interest on money that we should never have had to borrow. One sentence on the solution, just we have to go back to what I call the Canadian precedent, which involves the significant amounts of government-created debt-free money into the system to dilute this ocean of debt in which the world is drowning at the present time. Well, then the Cabal controls the pace of global warming. Of the three, global warming is the most important. When I talk about all three, some Americans say, Paul, I agree with everything you've said, but this business of global warming, that's just, it's a hoax. And they say, in effect, that I'm dead wrong. Well, I regret to say the science is on my side. All the legitimate science. I used to carry a map from the Globe and Mail showing, I think it was 15 graphs of all the different things that are going on in the world. Water temperature, air temperature, ice levels, and snow, and all of these things. And every single one was going in the wrong direction and had been for 30 years. And that's the real situation. Science proves that we have a problem that we have to solve now, and very little is being done about it. Until now, you've been hearing politicians saying, well, we're going to try and cut emissions so much in 20 years or 40 years or 50 years. We'll reduce them a little bit, and we'll do this and that, and we'll build a few windmills, and we'll do some things and spend a little money. Our house is on fire. And you don't say, well, I want to get out every stick of furniture and everything in there and tear out all the hardwood before you call the fire department. But that's what we're doing. The headlines are totally inconsistent with the reality. We should stop all drilling, stop all fracking, no more expansion of the tar sands. And then mobilize in an all-out war to save the planet. I say that we have 7 years, and I have 2 or 3 different books over here. One of them is Light at the End of the Tunnel, and when I wrote it, I said we had 10 years. And with the Money Mafia, which is the latest one, I said we have 7 years to replace the power source in every car, truck, airplane, tractor, ship, and house in the world in 7 years. You say, oh, we can't do that. We can. It's possible. If we have the money, and that's the first thing we have to do, and we can do that if we make up our minds and do it. We have the technology. The Cabal owns it. 15 years ago, Dr. Michael Wolff, who had high clearance and who worked in Nevada and S4, said that the U.S. working with the ETs had developed both cold fusion and zero-point energy. So the technology is there, but it's being kept secret because the oil cartel wants to cash in all of their trillions of dollars worth of chips before they start saving the house. It just doesn't add up. How could we do it? Well, in exactly the same way that we acted in World War II. I remember it well. I've been around for a few years, as you can see. In World War II, every automobile company, every refrigerator manufacturer, every washing machine manufacturer was converted to the making of armaments. And all we have to do now is do just the exact reverse. And take all of the armaments industry, which is responsible for these continuous wars that we have, and convert them to making zero-point energy engines and installing them. You say, well, it'll disrupt the economy. Well, of course it will disrupt the economy. Some jobs will go, but thousands, millions of jobs will be created in manufacturing these things and installing them. Fantastic. We can put everybody to work doing something positive. And then, recreate the planet too and undo some of the damage that's been done in the last few years, save our oceans and clean up some of the messes that have been made, the atomic dumps and the oil dumps and the other things that are an eyesore on the horizon. Well, that's where we are, and that's what we have to do. Well, the Cabal controls the ET file as well. Although it is now clear that UFOs, or at least 4 species, have been visiting Earth for thousands of years, a lot of people still don't believe it. There's some good examples in the Bible if you're familiar with that book. And in the mid-60s, Shanger, the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, was told, and he observed a flotilla of 50 UFOs coming south across Central Europe. And he nearly had a panic attack. He was just about ready to press the panic button when they all turned around and went north over the North Pole. And he was satisfied that they weren't Russian and that there wasn't going to be another world war. He ordered a study. It took 3 years to complete. And when it was finished, they said, it is absolutely certain that at least, and they underlined the at least, 4 species have been visiting our planet, or what we call our planet anyway, for thousands of years. There didn't seem to be much traffic for a long while, but as soon as the United States exploded the first atomic bomb, in New Mexico in 1945, all of a sudden, the UFOs started to come. There have been thousands of sightings. And over a few years, the number of species has increased, or the number of species that we have recognized has increased very dramatically. And some, if not all, are very interested in our atomic installations of all kinds. When you put off an atomic bomb, it has an effect that goes right out into the cosmos. They are very, very concerned about what we're doing and that we are almost sometimes predestined to blow ourselves up. The United States government has not yet relinquished first strike, which means that they haven't yet said they would not start using nuclear weapons first. That's insanity. Absolute insanity. Because there's no way, even though they have some very sophisticated things that we could talk about if we had a lot more time, there is no way that you could use them and get away with having a clean sweep and blowing up part of the world and the rest of it surviving. Just wouldn't happen. So, it is my belief that the visitors have made an inventory of every missile installation, nuclear power plant, and atomic storage on Earth. They have also from time to time interfered with US missile installations and affected their control systems. My first exposure to this was in 2006 when I delivered the keynote address at the Extraterrestrial Civilizations and World Peace Conference at Kona, Hawaii. A friend introduced me to Captain, retired United States Air Force, Robert Salas, a presenter who was there and who told well, first us over dinner, but then he wrote a book about it and presented at the conference of a UFO shutting down one by one 7 of the Minuteman I missiles at the installation where he was a commander. He wasn't the commander, but he was a top officer. Subsequent investigation never did determine whether or not this was a deliberate thing on the part of the visitors, or whether, in fact, it was due to the effect, electromagnetic effect of the craft itself on the missile control systems. There have been several cases since. I'm going to skip them. Quite a few of them, as a matter of fact, that have happened since. There are 2 ways of interpreting these incidents. The U.S. military used the instance as justification for additional expenditures on arms, and UFO, anti-UFO weapon systems in particular. Others believe that the UFOs are friends of the human species and are preparing to come to our rescue if a few psychotic generals ever decide to use their massive military nuclear might in the course of an all-out effort to conquer the world. Well, what does the Cabal plan for us? What is their end game? It is a new world order. The fascist government, unelected, run by them, for their benefit. Basically 2 classes, very rich, and all the rest who do the work. They even gave this the same name that Hitler had used, the New World Order. That's George Bush Sr. in an address to Congress said that this is what was being launched. Want to take over most of the world by either financial or military means. And they've been doing a pretty good job of it with the financial, driving people into the dust, and through trade agreements that are called trade agreements, but they aren't trade agreements. They're agreements to turn over power to the international banks and the transnational corporations, and to take power away from us, the people, and from our courts. And they set up tribunals to settle agreements, but the tribunals are their tribunals under their control. And so they are, in effect, taking us over without us even being aware of it. We have 2 agreements right now, the Canada-European Trade Agreement, which hasn't been ratified, and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. If either one of those is ratified, we will not be able to change our banking system to bail ourselves out of the mess we're in, because foreign banks would be able to sue us for tens of billions of dollars for lost profits or potential profits. So I hope some of you will go home and write the Prime Minister or your Member of Parliament and say, do not ratify either one of those agreements unless you first take out the dispute settlement mechanism, because that's what we're really concerned about. If you want to trade, giveaway or something to get a little something in the trade area, that's okay maybe. Well, we seem not to do very well when we're cooperating on these agreements. But to give that power away and to entrench it so that we could never get it back would just put us, I think, at the end of the road. And we don't want that, and it doesn't need to happen. Well, the major question mark is whether or not this is being done in conjunction with extraterrestrials, and if so, who is really calling the shots? I heard an address by Phil Schneider, an engineer who had worked underground for many years. He had a third level clearance. I think he was referring to a military base at Dulce in the United States that the US government had built for joint operation between themselves and the Greys from Zeta Reticuli. And it has 7 levels, and each one going down, it requires a higher classification for your clearance for your work to get down there. And he had a 3rd level security clearance. His testimony alone is enough to demand full disclosure. He said the black budget was 1.2 trillion every second year. Can you imagine what we could do to build the world and feed the hungry and provide a little help to people that need it with that kind of money? Underground cities are being built, he says very rapidly. I don't want to go into that too much detail tonight. He said that one of the things that really got to him was that one of his friends showed him that 10,000 railway cars with 143 pairs of shackles each were being built in the United States. Well, built for whom? Who are they going to put in the shackles? You know, is it going to be the blacks? Is it going to be the immigrants? Is it going to be the Mexicans? Is it going to be the Jews? Is it going to be the Catholics? Is it going to be, I don't know. Or is it just going to be people that don't agree with what they're doing? Any one of those categories is unacceptable. But something is going on. And that's reason enough to find out what it is before it's too late. Then Phil Schneider went on, and I quote him, "The federal government has now invented an earthquake device." He said, "I'm a geologist, and I know what I'm talking about. With the Kobe earthquake in Japan, there was no pulse wave, as in a normal earthquake, none. In 1989, there was an earthquake in San Francisco. There was no pulse wave with that one either. It is a Tesla device that is being used for evil purposes. The black budget programs have subverted science as we know it." Phil Schneider was a true patriot who became deeply concerned about what has been going on in the shadows of government. He handed in his extremely high security pass and started to speak the truth publicly. What he revealed is more than enough to demand immediate full disclosure. 7 months after the lectures quoted here tonight, he was found strangled with a garden hose allegedly tied tightly around his neck. And the official cause of death was suicide. Well, if you can believe that, you can believe anything. In the YouTube I released in March of this year, I said that due to lack of time, space, and expertise, my book did not include a section on chemtrails and the high altitude, high frequency active auroral research program, commonly known as HAARP. I now find from expert witnesses that the Cabal is poisoning the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the soil where we grow our food. Last Sunday morning, that's what, about 2 days ago? Got up, the most beautiful sky you've ever seen. The sun was coming up, and these chemtrails were right across the harbor. Absolutely gorgeous if you didn't know what they were. And then, of course, as the sun came up, eventually they turned white. And they were still pretty. And it went on all day until late in the afternoon. And how did they get away with it? I don't know. But a lot of people confuse a contrail with a chemtrail. A contrail is just the little bit of water vapor that comes out of the back end of a jet, and it disappears within a few seconds. Chemtrail comes right out and stays right across the horizon for a few seconds or longer, maybe a couple of minutes, and then starts to unravel and spread its poisons and form a special kind of cloud, a serious cloud that they have given a new name. I call them Satan's illegitimate twins of death and destruction. If you want the whole unhappy story, you can read Chemtrails, HAARP, and the Full Spectrum Dominance of Planet Earth by Alana Freeland. It's a great book. And there are others. There's a lot of information coming out. But this is not the only evil in the world today. The attack on Paris last Friday was evil personified. And our hearts go out to the families of the wounded and the deceased, as well as to all of the people of France. And I add to the people of Beirut, because they were left out in the consideration pretty well. France got all of the attention, but in Beirut, a suicide bomber killed 40 people, and it too was a sectarian operation. But when I think of ISIS, I think of a quote from the Bible: "As you sow, so shall you reap." And I know this is controversial, and I hesitate to be controversial. But I recall that after the deception of 9/11, when the Bush administration knew weeks before that it was going to happen, did nothing about it. Later it was shown that there was collusion based on the plan for a new American century, which included a number of wars in the Middle East, and which was calling for another Pearl Harbor in order to prepare the American people for what was going to happen. Immediately, this attack on Iraq, even though Iraq was not involved in any way, either directly or indirectly, in what was supposed to have happened. Sure, there was a ruthless dictatorship, and it was brought down, but the area had been stable until that time. It was a Sunni dictatorship. We're in a land where the majority was Shia. But at least they were advanced in many ways. And there was some kind of progress and recognition of women's place in the world in various areas. But all of a sudden, when the bombs started dropping on Baghdad, a problem which had been small and which was within the power of police and intelligence agencies to cope with, was multiplied 1,000 times over. And it's been getting worse ever since. I don't know how many of you have read Bob Fowler's book. Bob Fowler was the Canadian diplomat who was, well, there were two of them, but he's the one that I happen to know, who was kidnapped in Africa and wrote this very, very worthwhile book about the experience, and at a terrible time. And one of his interrogators, who was constantly trying to get him to convert to Islam, he asked one night, "When were you radicalized?" And he said, "The night the bombs started dropping on Baghdad." And every time a bomb drops or a drone misses its target and kills innocent people, the number of radicalized jihadists increases. So I said, what had been a manageable problem multiplied by the thousands. Saddam Hussein was deposed, but the US went along with setting up a Shia government, which did not treat the Sunnis well. In other words, they did not practice the golden rule. And we have seen what has happened since. Well, first there was Sunni resistance, and then ISIS was born. It was an extreme fundamentalist ideology, and you can't kill an ideology with bombs. You have to have a better idea. Our leaders, who will inevitably recommend more force, which fits in with the plan of the military-industrial complex, which is providing arms to both sides, incidentally, should change radically and suggest that all major religions get together under the auspices of the United Nations and work out a new paradigm, which is the only hope in a world where the instruments of death are now so terrible that war has to be considered absolutely off the book. After 6,000 years of fighting with each other, we have to stop and start cooperating. Because if we don't, our species could be wiped out entirely. And they should put a special emphasis or special part of the plan to get the Sunnis and the Shias together to talk, rather than each providing arms to one side or the other. And they should be able to work out their differences if they really want to, and if they understood the breadth and depth of the problems that we are facing as a species. Because they have the same holy book. And Allah, their God, is the God of Abraham, Isaac, Israel, and Ishmael. In other words, it's the God that some of us accept as our God. And then we should unite to practice the golden rule, because all of the major religions of the world have a tenet of that kind. All of them. But none of us practice it. So we have to get together and do two things. To build a just world and divert some of this money from the killing machines to doing what I call building the kingdom of God on earth, which is providing every child with a little bit of food and potable water to drink and a shirt on his or her head and a roof over, at least on his or her back, and a roof over his or her head, and a little basic health care and a little basic education so they can see what their potential is in making a contribution to the world. And then, at the same time, convert arms to industry and build the machines necessary to literally save the world. And if we do that, and if we run out of things to do, which I don't think we ever will, but if we do, then we can start spending some of the money after the 7 years, if we're successful in cleaning up the mess that we've made in the last 50 or 75 years in particular. You say, is there any hope? Well, I have to believe so, or I would have given up long ago. congenital optimist. I wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. I also believe in miracles. And I don't want to end on a note of doom and gloom. Not only does my book, The Money Mafia, contain a complete action plan that we have to follow if we want to write a better history than the one that we're now writing, but there are good things happening in the world. Thousands of them. The postscript of my book, which is entitled Spirituality is the Missing Link, tells the story of several that I know from my own experience, where a person or a couple of people have had an idea, they've had a call, as some people call it, to do something. And they have made a sacrifice and done something. One comes to mind, a psychology teacher from University of Carleton was convinced to take her holiday in a little country called Lesotho. Tiny country surrounded by Africa. Most people have never heard of it. 10 years ago. And when she was there and she saw the situation, she was called to do something. 10 years later, the operation is fantastic. It's looked to by their government. It's looked to by others to see what has been done. Young people are being educated. They're being told about AIDS. They're being told about health care. They're being indoctrinated as future leaders of their country. And just an absolute modern miracle, and recognized as such. My wife and I were just a more recent one, getting on a little walk a week ago Sunday, and we went in the harbor front, and there was a chap recognized me, came over and said hello and said a couple of nice things, and then we asked him what he did, and he's a miner. He said, but I don't use the chemicals and things that the big miners do, and that's not necessary. I've got a better way if they would only look at it. He said it's a clean way of extraction. But then he went on to say that because he had been successful, he had just, in effect, adopted 65 orphans and built them a house and providing them with education and food and hope for the future. And you know, we went home saying, you know, this is happening all over the world. It's just not just a couple of cases, there are dozens of them. But what we need is a tsunami of people who have the change of heart and do what has to be done. So we have to change our values and abandon our worship of money. And right at the end of the tunnel, there's a chapter called Mammon Rules the World. And we have to stop doing that. And we have to learn to love all of its inhabitants, regardless of whether their skin is red or yellow, black or white, and regardless of their religion and sexual orientation. The glue that holds the cosmos together is love. And we should all work together to build an earthly kingdom in accordance with the will of the Creator. I'm not a Catholic, but Pope Francis gets my vote because he's the only world leader who's telling the truth about the mess we're making of our home. We're destroying our planet, and the perpetual war policies, quote unquote, of the New World Order gang are creating perpetual poverty for the masses while the world is in crisis. Only a moral and spiritual revolution can save it. It is the only hope for light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you very much. So I understand we have about a half an hour for questions and answers. Is that the idea?
As long as you'll tolerate us,
Pardon me?
as long as you'll stand us.
As long as I can stand it, eh? I can stand it for 34 minutes. Or less. Yes.
You're talking about how much money the Cabal is doing and all that. What is their purpose? How can they enjoy it if they destroy everything around them?
How can they enjoy it? 2 trillions if they already have one?
Yes.
No.
And knowing that everything else around
I don't
them
know.
will be
Have you ever
destroyed.
played Monopoly?
But you don't hurt anybody when you play Monopoly.
No, but it's the same idea. If you've got a lot of money, you think you'd be happy if you had twice as much. If you had got twice as much, then you think you'd be happy if you had 4 times as much. And then, you know, some people...
Global warming is not affecting
Pardon me?
them. The global warming and the chemtrails are not affecting them. The global warming and the chemtrails are not affecting them.
They don't think about it. They're so busy making money. Most people, you know, and this is, I guess we're all guilty of this, you're so busy with what you're doing, most of us who don't have a lot of money, trying to earn enough to pay the mortgage at the end of the month and to get food on the table and so on. But the others in accumulating and under globalization of bringing together under one roof all of the major companies in one area so that they can set the prices instead of having competition and having lower prices. And that's just the way the system works. I was thinking of a couple yesterday, as a matter of fact. Listerine, for example, probably could be sold for $2.95 a bottle. Used to be $4.95. Now I think Shoppers is $8.95. Loblaws had a special, but it's just a lot of little water with some stuff in it. And Coke is the same way. Anybody here old enough to remember when Coke was 5 cents a bottle? Oh, there are 2 or 3 of them. But we're moving in the direction of power, a concentration of power and money. And it was interesting, I was in Washington in May 2013, where Steve Bassett had got together 40 people as witnesses to try and convince 6 former congresspeople about UFOs. And we started out on Monday morning, and we got through to each one of them, one at a time, until the last day, Friday afternoon. And here they were, they had put up millions of dollars for these projects, had no knowledge of it at all. And they were all skeptics. There wasn't one of them at the beginning that believed. And, you know, it just shows you how isolated people can get from reality. As a matter of fact, that's the reason I wrote the Money Mafia. I had no intention of doing it, none. I thought the light at the end of the tunnel was my last, my last book. But I came out of there and said, there is so much, well, I hate to use the word ignorance, lack of understanding of what's really going on, that I've got to try and do this. I came home and started writing right away, and I had a lot of emails didn't get answered for about a year and 4 or 5 months while I was doing it, because I was trying to get the message through to people that something is happening in the world, and you don't know about it, and you should find out about it, and you should demand some information about it so that you can do something about it before it's too late. And that comes back to, I guess, as far as the people accumulating that much money, they will do it as long as we will let them do it. But we have to have a counterattack. It was Warren Buffett that said just the other day that there is, incidentally, I don't want to look like a prophet, although sometimes I feel like one. In 1999, I wrote a book saying the next world war will be between the banks and the people. And that's going on now, and we're losing. That's just what Warren Buffett said. There is a war between the rich and the poor, and we are winning. And we have to do something, and we can do something. We have to change the monetary system and reduce that ratio, that leverage of being able to lend the same money 20 times, down to maybe 2 times over a period of 7 years. And in the process, I talk about this in the book, we could and should create $150 billion a year in Canada and split it between the federal and provincial governments for 7 years and reestablish the system where banks have to have cash reserves and raise that cash reserve requirement by 5% a year until it reaches 34%. At the end of 7 years, then you would have 2-to-1 ratio. They would no longer be able to do what they run the world the way they are now. Most of their assets would be required in the process of the changeover. And the difference is we the people, would have control of our own economies and our own banking system, and they would no longer be able to be the kingpins in a cabal which is running us into the ground and which has other plans for us. But it has to start, and fortunately, it should be Canada to take the lead, because we're the only country that has everything ready to do it. We have a precedent. And so I would encourage you to try and encourage the new government to lead the way, because it's not just the money, which would help a lot. I mean, Ontario's share would be $38 billion a year. Do you think what the Premier could do with $38 billion? She wouldn't have to sell off the rest of Ontario Hydro, and we don't have to leave the potholes for 2 or 3 years until we can afford to pay for them. And the Quebec's would be 28, I think it is. They wouldn't have to have a commission to find out where they can scrape $2 billion more down and cut back on the students while giving $1 billion to Bombardier, which may be a good idea, but I mean it was a bad deal with the students. We don't actually need to create that much money, but we have to do it to accomplish what we want in a war against the kind of people who are running the world today. In other words, to level things out a little bit. And inevitably, we would have a surplus, the federal government, right from the beginning, and we could start paying down the debt. And I estimate that by the end of the 7 years, we could reduce our federal debt by probably about 1/3. So maybe from 600 billion to 400 billion or something of that order. And it's, as I say, not just the fact that we would have as much money as we really needed to balance the books federally, provincially, and municipally at a reasonable tax rates. But more important, we would change the balance of power in the world. And Joe Stiglitz was one of the few economists that I even bother reading. Has written a new book on how to save capitalism for the 99%, not just for the 1%. And the most important thing he says, because he says a lot of things which are great but aren't going to happen. The most important thing he says, we have to have a major change in the balance of power. That's what we've got to do. I'm here and then I'll look this way.
You're a very courageous man who's come out and talking about this with a lot of credentials. Why do you think you've been allowed to, speak, as you mentioned, that other gentleman who ended up, with his life being taken? Why do you think they allow you to speak?
I think for a couple of reasons, probably because I'm so old, and because I haven't taken any oath. He had taken an oath of silence on these matters. I have not. And I think also perhaps I have a little providential help from time to time.
Yes.
which sort of keeps me out of harm's way, has so far anyway, and I'm very grateful for it. Thank you. Yes.
Listening to you tonight, I don't know listening to you tonight, I think like with many people, I'm getting Shanger, getting more ups.
Use the mic. Does it work?
Come up to the front.
Listening to you tonight, I'm getting, again, more angry and angry at what's going on. Can you, number one, can you tell us the names of the people in Cabal? And you have 150 people here who really want to do something. And we hear about the macro level about what we need to do. I don't want to waste my time trying to communicate to a politician who won't communicate, who refuses to communicate back. So what can we do on an individual level here as a group or as individuals within the next year? And can we get the ETs to talk to us rather than to the useless so-called leaders?
That sounds to me like more than one question. Or maybe I can't count. Anyway, the first thing on names is the only one I use is David Rockefeller. I have a few others in the book related to the banking industry because they're on the record. But his is easy because he has written a memoir in which he himself verifies to a very large extent something that was in the true story of the Bilderbergers, that he said, wouldn't the world be better run by bankers and the elite than the present system? In effect, if people like him were running the world. Well, in my book, when I say, Mr. Rockefeller, you have been for the last 50 years, and look at the mess that it's in. And Steve Bassett, who was an American, did me the honor of letting me use a list of many, many things that have gone wrong in the States, that shouldn't have gone wrong, and many of them are as a result of the fact that the Cabal has been in charge instead of somebody closer to the people. So you have to be careful using names, because sometimes if you say something that can't be proven, and in this area of UFOs, a lot of it can't be proven in the sense that I can't show you, as Phil Schneider did in a couple of his lectures, a piece taken from one of the starships, or I can't show you a document, an original document, because they're all locked up, except some old ones that you get all blacked out. So you have to be careful on that, but at the same time, everybody knows what's going on. When I say everybody knows what's going on, that's not true. A few of us know what's going on, and we want the others to. I think I've always said, and certainly, we have more power than we use. I think you've mentioned earlier, if 400 or 500 people all wrote at the same time on the same issue, that could have quite an effect, quite an effect. Has to be a letter. Emails are useless. Has to be a letter. If you're writing to our MPs or cabinet ministers, you don't have to put postage on them. And it has to be one that doesn't look as if it was just photocopied from somebody else's ideas. From the heart, we want you to do something about our financial system, for example. From the heart, please don't ratify CETA and the Trans-Pacific Agreement unless you first take out the dispute settlement mechanism and are sure that it's not going to do any harm and that it's not going to unilaterally change the Constitution, which is probably immoral, certainly immoral, and probably illegal by taking away from Parliament its absolute control over money and banking in this country. So that plus the kinds of things that we can do as individuals of helping one other person or two other people, of smiling when we do our alms, and other things that are well within our capability as individuals, and which take a little work. I used to be of the kind of person, if I gave somebody in the street a little money, it was not so much, it was just a thing out of my abundance. Now I at least take the time to stop and say hello and how are you doing today, and is it cold, and how are you doing, and this sort of thing. And you can see the smiles on their faces because you're interested in them as an individual child of God, and we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yes.
In regards to the drought in California, because of geoengineering and chemtrails, have you ever organized big groups of people to come together using crystals to pray on the archangels, extraterrestrials to bring rain? There's a prophecy about the rainbow warriors that heal the earth when it's dying, and there's people that are becoming aware of the inner earth beings. There's entrances to the North and South Pole, and these beings are the true rulers of this planet. The New World Order, Illuminati, no match against these extraterrestrial beings, and the only thing is that they want to make themselves known, but they're looking for representatives to come and share this knowledge with the rest of the world. So, thank you.
I think there are a lot of things in this area we could talk for a long time. There are a lot of individual conversations going on now. There have been for 40 or 50 years. When the so-called leaders of the world would not talk to some of the species who want to help us, they started selecting individuals to be their outlets and to talk for them and to write books about them and so on. And you know some of the names. And these people have been very influential, and this is still going on at the present time. There are, at the same time, not just allegations, but there are a lot of invisible people. The cosmos is alive with life, both animate and inanimate. And I got an email today with a picture that was taken in front of one of the cafes in France. I have a friend in England who can magnify the picture enough to show the little people who are there around the perpetrators giving advice. And if you were to take a picture of us tonight, they would be here. But they can give good advice or bad advice. And they're not all on the same side. And what we have to do is learn to discern between, pull Pearl Harbor or start an orphanage. And it depends how many of us are able to discern the right or the light from the wrong and the dark. But obviously, according to my friend, and I have great respect for him, he seems to have a capability here that very few people have. He has shown a picture which shows the interference which is going on behalf of somebody. And we have to take that into account when we work our plans out and decide what we should do.
It's like biblical Moses and Jesus calling down the forces of God to come and help people on earth.
I'm sorry, it's difficult to hear without the...
So, first of all, I'd like to thank you for doing what you do. I think we're all inspired by what you do, and hopefully we can carry on what you started. I have 1,001 questions. I saw the chemtrails the other day from my organic farm, and again today. I'm concerned about Fukushima and what's really happening there. China and the reserve currency is supposed to happen at the end of the month. So there's a lot of things we could keep going on forever, but I'm wondering if you know much about the Kesh Foundation's new plasma unit. With regard to Kesh is a scientist who's created a plasma unit that's completely free energy. He's offered it to the world, to all the ambassadors of the countries, because obviously if he tried to patent it, what would happen to him. So it's available almost as an open source. Do you know anything about that, and what do you think of it?
The answer is, I think I've seen an email mentioning it, and that's all I know about it.
I think you know Dr. William Tiller very well. He says hello. We met him about 3 weeks ago, and he was sharing with us his intention box and experiment and the results that he's been getting. And as you were speaking, I was thinking how that could actually be accelerated and used. And for those who are in BG3, I shared with him the BG3 option, which he is now going to be looking at and addressing. And I think with the biogeometry component, which, you know, it's more detailed, but that combination influencing the matrix of consciousness, and with all of us here adding to that, I think that we could also do a lot of what you spoke about on a positive note.
More power to anyone who's strive, that's all I can say.
Osio, this is not such a question, but another comment that people should give consideration to the UN Declarations of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the Cochabamba People's Accord for the Environment and the Rights of Mother Earth.
Thank you for your time and wisdom. It makes me feel that what we need, our thinking needs to be understood more. That the senses that we see the world through is not really enough to change things because we don't understand cause. But what we're seeing is destruction, and it's out of balance. And destruction is what we think is strength. We believe that. If someone is really strong and we have the biggest army in the world, then we have to give in to that. And that makes us afraid of it, and that's the way we're controlled. But in truth and in reality, creativity comes from the heart and not from fear. And that's the other balance to destruction. Creativity is what balances the destructive power. And we have that power if we realize it. And if we realize that what we think is power is fear and destruction, and if we can understand that, to know that if we don't have fear, then we'll be creative and they won't have a chance. They'll die trying to create the fear. And they may, but it won't matter, because if we're not in fear, then we have the power to change the world. And I feel that's what they're afraid, that we will understand. And we don't have to worry about any of the technical things. We have to be sure that we're without fear and with love.
I think what you're talking about is the lens through which we see or hear things. And you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, or maybe I should put it positively, fortunately we now have the internet as a means of communication, which we didn't have before. When and I have a chapter in the Money Mafia on the biggest heist in history, which is when the major bankers in New York pulled the wool over the eyes of Congress and put through the Federal Reserve System, so-called. It's neither Federal nor Reserve, but that's what they call it. And immediately, Morgan Bank set up a committee to go out and find out the most influential papers in the country, and they bought control of the 25 most influential, so they would not comment negatively on this very clever takeover that had occurred. of the US money creation system by the banks instead of the people. And one has, that's incidentally, if you're interested in this subject, it's in The Web of Debt by Ellen Brown, one of the best books on monetary theory and so on. Read the first 100 pages. It isn't necessary to go all the way through the book. And I have some differences with her on, at the end, her solutions, because they are really more micro than macro. And I applaud her. She would like us to set up a Bank of Ontario or a Bank of Toronto and this sort of thing. More power to her, more power to anybody who can do it. But we have to stop this thing that's going on in the world, and that's my area, and that's the reason that I'm concentrating on it. And so we have to assume that the lens with which we are seeing things, like the major papers and the major news outlets, are all under the control of the cabal, directly or indirectly. And you can trace a lot of them. There's no difficulty in trying to do that. And so they set the stage. They say, here's a terrible thing happening, and we have to do this, we have to do that. We have to react quickly, we have to apply more force, or whatever it is that their line at the time. So we now have at least a small instrument, and it's not just small, it's an important, growingly important instrument of being able to bypass that lens and saying, here's another lens, put it on so that you can filter out all of the nonsense and look at some of the reality. And I very much encourage doing that, because there's such a difference between what is really going on. I have a godson who wrote me the other day and said, I've started to read your book. Well, he said he'd read it and he wants to have lunch. But he said, the reality is so different from what we see around us. And that's the truth. And we have to get more people to understand it by bypassing it, going around and seeing if we can't build up enough knowledge, concern, and esteem to get the message out to millions more people. I think we can do it.
I would just like to, if I could say one more comment. If we could imagine that power is destructive, and power, since we think it's strong, we think it's power, or destructive power that's controlling everything today, we believe it, and that belief blocks our creativity. It blocks our heart, the fear. So if we could see power as weakness, we just change our belief that power is weakness, and we would not be afraid of it. And that means that our heart would open, our creativity would blossom, and this can happen overnight. Or I'd like to imagine that it could happen overnight. So if we can realize when we see the power, or we see the destruction, it is not power, it's weakness, and they're afraid. And we catch that fear, and then we're trapped in it. Like we're in this fear prison. And if we realize, think different, but we don't have to be afraid of what's going on. And we will change the world with that.
I want a newsletter article.
I was just thinking about how all of this relates to current situations, and just in my life and in my circles. And what I find is that a lot of people have all this information, and this information has been out and shared for a while now, but they don't know what to do with it other than give up And because anytime you're giving energy to a system that you know is destroying the planet, and you're conscious of it, then you're like, well, where can I put my energy that it's actually going to show like positive benefits for myself and my family and the people around me? And usually that ends up not making any money, and then you end up being like a draw on your friends and your family and your contacts around you and stuff like that. So like there's got to be a happy middle ground where we can actually create something that's productive and useful and doesn't hurt the environment while not paying out to this cabal. And I think it's a real big problem, especially for people in my age group and who don't have any money and who are graduating with lots of debt and no job prospects. So I just wonder if anybody can talk about like positive ways in which we can contribute to society but not contribute to the cabal.
Yes, sir. We'll just take about 2 more questions. I think there's one down here and a couple at the back, and that'll be it. And try and keep your comments reasonable length so we can get at least a couple more in.
I sense that you were seeing in Canada a possibility for leading the way, changing the banking system back to something that makes some kind of sense. I would think that you might have some connections within the current governing party to be able to talk to people about that. Do you see any hope there? Because I can see that people saying, well, if you just print money, you're creating inflation and that's going to devalue the dollar, so why would you ever do that? Are there people that you think you can reach with this, or we can reach that, reinforce it by writing and encouraging them to do so, and also the trade deals?
I think people are pretty skeptical about monetary reform because they've been brainwashed. And they just assume that government-created money is inflationary, bank-created money is not. And I guess the proof of that is that when the Fed was formed 103 years ago, a dollar then is worth 5 cents now. So bank-created money has reduced the value of money from $1 to 5 cents. And Cokes have gone from 5 cents to whatever they're now at in my lifetime. So and one of the reasons that the present system is really more inflationary is because you have to create enough money to pay the interest on all this money that's been borrowed before you get any for growth. And if the nice part of the plan that I have, it's in the book and I've circulated it widely, we'll probably do some more in the weeks ahead, is that the cash reserve requirements build up at the same time that the money's being created, so that all of the money is sterilized, as it were. And none of it is inflationary. The money that you deliberately create is spent into circulation, and the great advantage is that if you build a hospital, you only pay for it once instead of 3 times, 2 or 3 times. And so that it's the right way to go. If you let the banks then, multiply it by 8 or 10 or 20 or whatever, that would be inflationary. But that is not the intention. You increase their cash reserves so that none of that money really can be multiplied, and consequently that you can keep inflation exactly where you want it, to the extent that anybody can, and you can do a pretty good job.
So just, have you had any conversations with people that would lead us to be hopeful that in the current circumstances that there might be changes?
I haven't seen yet anybody really too interested in it. That doesn't mean that I've given up.
Thank you very much.
So one back here and one back here.
We have an example of Iceland, how they removed from the Euro Canal. Could we use that here? And what's your perception of how they did it?
Here.
Iceland.
Here's a mic. Mike.
In Iceland, they removed themselves from the Euro Cabal. I don't know how they did it, but I would like your perception of that. And if we can do it here in Canada.
Well, you're talking about Iceland?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, free church to Iceland. We can lead the way for the rest of the world. We should. And one at the back there.
You've spoken before about the tall whites. What is their relationship with the Cabal in terms of money or any exchange? I guess the Cabal will get the money. What do they get out of it? And what's the relationship with what's going on in the Middle East and ISIS and all this? Are they standing by and watching this happen? Are they part of it? Are they involved in any way?
You see, these are the questions that nobody really knows the answer to unless they know the answer to. The tall whites have been working with the United States Air Force for many years now. And I guess what they get out of it is exchange of technology. Whether they get anything else out of it or not, I do not know, because that is not something that I'm privy to. So, and you know, the relationship between the United States government and the Rays. What is it? Do they have an agreement? And who's on top? I don't know. I'd like to know. I think we should find out. I just have one comment in closing, and then put back to Marilyn. One of the things that a friend, Carol Rosen, who herself was an abductee, told me, she worked with Werner von Braun, the German rocket scientist, and he had mellowed by the time she worked with him. And he was talking about the industrial military complex. And he said they will always have to have an enemy because they can't spend all that money if they haven't got an enemy. The public won't put up with it. He said, first, it will be the communists. Next, he said, it will be the terrorists. And then he said, it will be the extraterrestrials. And so in my book, I say that if, you know, someday you see the spaceships coming over, and don't get afraid and get down on your knees, just wave to them and say, hi, have a nice day. Because that's the way to treat it. Rather than just say, you know, we're going to give them. Apparently we have a draw for some books that I've donated.
Okay, if you could hold on a few minutes, I think we've all been more enlightened than when you came in this evening. And remember, before you leave, if you want to continue this dialogue and finding out about what we're doing, please put your name on the contact list if you don't have it yet. And of course, I'm sure you remember to give donations to our group. And come back in January. This is a wonderful audience. And now we're going to have the draw first for
Sorry.
to the light at the end of the tunnel. Okay, get out your little slips that you were given at the beginning. So for the first instance, who here is red and victorious? G? Oh. Okay, victorious? So someone here is literally victorious tonight. And for a miracle in waiting, sometimes there are a few repeats, so that's why I asked for the first. Okay, the first person who's orange and who here is confident. Absolutely.
A draw for books.
For those
Dowser style.
For those who haven't seen this before, I think it's more fun and it just has more meaning than numbers. And for the Money Mafia. The first blue, who's enchanting tonight? Blue and enchanting? So, first you have to say to the microphone, I am enchanting.
I'm enchanting.
If I could just say, I don't make my living from selling books, but that's the way I try to spread ideas. So if any of you are interested, I have a few over here and I'd be glad to autograph them for you.
And please share food and ask any questions. Thank you very, very, very much for coming. See you in January.
Camp d'Alcartier,
Cartier.
Royal 22e Régiment.
Oui, c'est vrai.
Do you remember?
Not very well, no.
Yes, but you were, and I was a senior to the other officers, so they gave you my apartment to sleep overnight. I had 2 rooms. That was 50 years ago.
Is that when I led the band?
Could be.
Yeah, that I remember.
Oh, that you're doing. But that was in 1965, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was down there for a visit.
Yes.
And
Quebec
dinner.
City.
Yeah.
That's 50 years ago. 65.
The newsletter is excellent. It really gets a whole lot of stuff together.
Alrighty, that was Paul Hellyer, former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada and Defense Minister, talking about the Cabal, the Money Mafia, and that was part of the Toronto Dowsers meeting, and he's on a book tour for,
Did you ever run into or know the name Frederick Skillison from Iceland? He had FPROT, the antivirus.
No.
Did you ever know about the antivirus?
No.
Iceland is one of the world famous antivirus.
No, I mean, there's only 320,000, and they adopted me.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, what I want to do is get a card from you if you have it.
I don't.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask you, if you will, to... No, I don't know if you're going to be... On this here, there's a word, revelatorium.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to YouTube and type in that as the keyword, you'll bring up orange and yellow. It's called the Revelatorium of Alpha and Omega. It's an hour-long interview I gave in Toronto here 2 weeks ago. I gave another one again today that'll be up in a couple of days. But I would like to do something with you somewhere.
Yeah.
But you need to see what I'm doing first.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to leave it up to you to get a hold of me.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
There you go. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Now, Marilyn did say, who I do know, she doesn't want to be on camera, so that's why we didn't have Marilyn on camera, and I had to ad-lib. Okay, so my name is Shanger. I'm a mod and live stream director here at Occupy Toronto, and I'm glad you enjoyed this. And if you're watching this in the archives, you really want to know your stuff. And for the live viewers, thank you. And I will be putting this also on YouTube, and if you're watching it there, okay, ciao folks. Since we live streamers never say bye, but rather peace out, and see you on the live chat. Toronto Dowsers. Ciao.